There are countless occurrences throughout history and throughout the globe of people going missing under mysterious and strange circumstances. Sometimes the nature of the disappearance is in itself the mystery. Sometimes the eventual appearance or discovery of a missing person is equally, if not more, mysterious. But in today's story, we talk about 5 lads that set off on a reasonably typical road trip to play in a basketball competition, and what follows is still mystifying authorities to this very day. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Please join me now as we have a wee look at this chilling tragedy and ask that all-important question. What happened to the Yuba City 5? We've all heard horror stories, campfire tales, and seen scary movies all revolving around a cabin in the woods and the mysteries that are contained within. This is not a fictitious story or a script for a Hollywood movie. What we are about to uncover is very real and tragic. Let's take a trip across to Yuba City in Northern California, situated just north of Sacramento. On the evening of the 24th of February 1978, 5 men were buzzing with excitement and preparing for a wee road trip. They would be travelling up north to Chico to the California State University. Driving there would take roughly about an hour or so, as it's around 46 miles north of Yuba City. The 5 men had formed their own basketball team. They would often meet up to either play basketball or watch basketball. Either way, their respective families were just happy that they had a good friendship and were being socially and physically active. The team was called the Gateway Gators and were sponsored by a local programme for the mentally handicapped. See, all 5 of the men suffered from intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions. On February 25th, the Gators were due to play their first game in a week-long tournament sponsored by the Special Olympics, for which the winners would get a free week in Los Angeles. The lads were clearly excited and were looking forward to the tournament and the subsequent prize. The 5 men that made up the Gators basketball team were 25-year-old Gary Mathias, 29-year-old Bill Sterling, 24-year-old Jack Hewitt, 32-year-old Ted Weir, and 30-year-old Jack Madruga. Just after dinner, Gary Mathias was nervously pacing up and down as he was awaiting the arrival of his friends. We all do it. If you're waiting for a taxi or a delivery that you know is coming, there's that kind of nervous energy, the feeling of anticipation. Snow was forecast that night, but Gary had reassured his parents by saying that he wouldn't need his windbreaker jacket as he would be coming right back home once the game was over. Shortly before that, Ted Weir was having a similar discussion with his grandmother about the weather, and he equally reassured her that he won't be needing his coat as he rushed out of the door to the sound of a car horn outside. His pals were here. Jack Madruga had pulled into Ted's driveway in a 1969 Mercury Montego. Sitting in the front passenger seat was Jack Hewitt, and in the back was Bill Sterling, all ready to get on the road. But first, they had to stop off and collect Gary Mathias, as he lived a short journey outside of town in Oroville. A short time later, all 5 men were bundled into the car and were on the road, heading north towards Chico. Ted Weir was the oldest at 32. Despite that, he had the mind of a child, but was outgoing and friendly, traits that he shared with his pal Bill Sterling, who was deeply religious. Jack Hewitt was the shortest member of the Gators, standing 5 foot 9 inches tall. He often found social situations uncomfortable, but once he relaxed and came out of his shell, his natural charisma and cheery personality would shine through. Jack and Ted were closest friends and were reported to be inseparable. Ted would often look out for Jack, and when needed would even make phone calls on his behalf. Jack Madruga had served in the military. In the army he served in Vietnam, but was later discharged due to a failed medical evaluation. Although Madruga was never formally diagnosed as having any mental or intellectual impairment, it was commonly known that he was what people would deem as slow. However, the state of California declared Jack competent enough to possess a driver's license, and his prized possession being the very car that the boys were now travelling in, his beloved turquoise and white Mercury Montego. Gary Mathias had also served in the army and was stationed for a period in West Germany. However, he would be honourably discharged in 1973 after succumbing to a drug-related nervous breakdown, after which he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had been taking his prescribed medication since his diagnosis. In that time, his condition greatly improved, allowing his quality of life to improve to a point where he was able to maintain a job working for his stepfather's landscaping business. Bill Sterling was similar to Ted in that he had the mind of a child and would rarely leave his home unless he was attending church or attending a basketball game. He would also spend his spare time at a local hospital where he would read the Bible to the patients. The chatter in the car was an excited one as the lads travelled northwards towards their destination of Chico. Their respective parents and grandparents assisted the lads by sorting and laying out the team's uniforms in preparation for the big game. When the lads never arrived home at the agreed time after the basketball game, families frantically called each other, and once the realisation that none of the men were accounted for, the police were soon contacted. As the investigation kicked off, it wasn't until the police had issued a bulletin for the men and news travelled to Chico that the first pieces of an ever-growing puzzle first came to light. Witnesses confirmed seeing the boys at the basketball game and a local store clerk at Bears Market in downtown Chico. They bought snacks along with sodas and cartons of milk to drink. It was shortly before the store's 10 p.m. closing time. The clerk later remembered the men because she was so annoyed that such a large group of men had come in and delayed her from beginning the process of closing the store for the night. Yuba Police Lieutenant Lance Ayres took up the investigation. He knew all 5 of the lads for years and attended high school with Ted Weir and Ted's brothers. Because he knew the lads personally, Ayres would give the case his full attention. As such, one of his first protocols was to order a search into the surrounding areas of where the boys were last seen, in and around the Feather River mountain range. It wasn't long before the lieutenant got a lead. Madruga's beloved Montego had been located, but to Ayres' surprise, it was 70 miles away from Chico. It was now the 28th of February, and the lads had been missing for 3 days. Snow had fallen in the days since the men vanished, and as such, snow had all but buried the car. One thing of note was that the car appeared to have been deliberately parked at its location as opposed to being abandoned or crashed. Inside the vehicle, police would find empty candy bar wrappers and several maps folded neatly inside the glove compartment. The car keys were missing, however, so the police had to hotwire the car and it was driven back to Oroville. There was more than a quarter of a tank of gas still remaining in the car, which was confusing to the investigators, as this would have been more than enough to get the lads safely back home. The car was mechanically sound and was working just fine, so with that in mind, police wondered if the car had maybe gotten stuck in the snow, but this would prove to not be the case at all. The police, already frustrated, would be further slowed down, as further snowstorms would batter the area, and unfortunately, the search was halted until the spring. As word spread of the missing boys and a reward being issued for any information, Lieutenant Ayres and his team worked tirelessly in conjunction with the men's families to investigate every lead and angle that came in. Reports would flood the switchboards of sightings in San Francisco, Canada, and even far as Florida. Unfortunately, all proved fruitless. Hope was almost gone when unexpectedly on the 4th of June, a call was passed to Ayres. It seemed a group of motorcyclists had stumbled upon something at a US Forestry Service camp some 20 miles away from where the Montego had been found. A biker group had stopped by the forestry camp for a rest when they were overcome by a sweet, sickening smell, a smell that most people would instantly recognise as death. Believing this to be nothing more than a dead animal carcass that's been left out in the California sun and then stinking up the place, one of the bikers headed towards the trailer in the centre of the grounds. As he approached, the smell became stronger and he noticed a window on the trailer had been broken. Once inside, they discovered what the smell was. Under several layers of blankets was the decaying body of Ted Weir. Later reports showed that Weir, who previously weighed around 200 pounds, had lost more than 80 pounds, which would lead police and forensics to conclude that he had starved to death. When investigators took a closer look at the scene, they were baffled at what they uncovered. Ted Weir's feet was riddled with frostbite. He had grown a beard, which investigators determined that he must have been alive for at least 8 weeks. But for some unknown reason, he never once tried to leave the bed. The officers found empty packets of food scattered throughout the cabin, which meant that he had clearly eaten at some point. They also found an unlocked metal cabinet in the same room that Ted was laying in. Upon further inspection, it was discovered that it contained several packets of long-life dried food, which would have been easy to prepare and would have sustained all 5 men for a whole year, yet this was all untouched. When Ayres further examined the scene, another point that stuck out to him was that at no point had anyone attempted to build a fire. There were tons of boxes of unused matches and plenty of books and magazines lying around that could have been used to fuel a fire. Even more bizarre is that the propane tank behind the trailer was found to have plenty of fuel inside and be in perfect working order, yet no one had even tried to turn it on. The next day, Plumas County Police located the body of Jack Madruga. He was discovered 11 miles from the trailer on a road leading back towards where his car had initially been discovered. He was found near to a stream. Most of the flesh on his right arm was gone. His hand was still clutching his favourite watch. He was missing 2 fingers and both of his eyes. Not far from Madruga, in a nearby wooded area, police also discovered bones. They had been scattered around, and later analysis proved that they belonged to Bill Sterling. Despite protests from Lieutenant Ayres and the police, Jack Hewitt Sr. joined the search. He himself tragically located a pair of Levi jeans and shoes, the same as his son had been wearing when he vanished. He also found a backbone. The next day, an assistant sheriff discovered a skull, which dental records confirmed to be that of Jack Hewitt. The only person still to be traced was Gary Mathias. Investigators were naturally worried, as due to his history with schizophrenia, they considered that maybe he hadn't taken his medication. It had been 4 months since the group's disappearance, and as such, he would be in quite a state if he was still alive. Gary Mathias' shoes were discovered inside the same trailer where Ted Weir was discovered. It's believed that he had swapped out his shoes for the larger leather ones which adorned Weir's feet once frostbite had taken over. To this day, Gary Mathias has never been found. Investigators speculate that the boys had become lost whilst driving, and as the snow got thicker and heavier, they abandoned the car and tried to make it home on foot. This meant they would have to have walked over 20 miles over uneven mountainous terrain in the freezing cold before they arrived at that forestry trailer. It's believed that Ted Weir was suffering from frostbite by the time that they got to the trailer, so the others ventured out for help, whilst Mathias stayed behind with Weir. Maybe the men were taken over by this snowstorm, and after several days of waiting, Mathias may have set off at a later time. Questions. Lots and lots of questions. Why had they driven up that road in the first place? It was not on the same road that connects Chico back to Yuba City. Jack Madruga's mother would later claim that she believed someone or something chased the boys from the car and up the mountain trail. But these were 5 strong, physically fit men. Police often wonder what would make all 5 men leave the confines of a perfectly working car and trek 20 miles into the wilderness on a freezing cold night. Why did they not start a fire in the trailer? Why did they not search or scavenge for supplies? Unless they were trying to hide, but from who or what? It's thought that maybe due to their collective mental disabilities, that the group just panicked and didn't know how to process or deal with the situation. But remember that Mathias and Madruga were both army veterans. Surely they would have known what to do. Let's look at another possible explanation then, shall we? With any similar cases to this, there will always be more woohoo theories like aliens or spies, but one person's witness statement may well shed some light on what really happened that fateful night. On the 2nd of June 1978, Lieutenant Ayres spoke to a man named Joseph Shones, who reported that on that night of the 24th of February, he had been driving along the same road that the Madruga's beloved Montego was later discovered. Sean was driving a Volkswagen Beetle, which at one point had gotten stuck in the snow. As he got out of his car in an attempt to push it clear, he suffered a mild heart attack and was forced to take shelter back in the car and regain his composure. He spent the night in his car and was woken at 2 AM as he could hear strange whistling nearby. When he looked out of his window, he could see a group of people. They were backlit by what seemed to be headlights. He could see that the group consisted of several men and one woman. He could also see that she was holding a baby. They were all standing around 100 feet away. Sean stepped out of his Beetle and, in an effort to get some help, shouted to the group, but none of them responded and instead rushed back to the car, and the headlights vanished in what Sean would say was an eerie silence. Later that same night, he was awoken again by the same whistling noise that he heard earlier, and lights shining through the car windows, but he was unable to see who or what it was this time. At around 5 AM, the fuel in Sean's car ran out and the engine cut out. With no other way to keep warm, he was forced out of his car and walked roughly 8 miles down the trail towards a lodge there. As he walked, he noticed the Montego sitting quietly on the roadside, but thought nothing more of it. Without any further information other than what Sean's had reported, this didn't bring police any closer to finding a solution. Things were definitely not as it seemed in this case. If closer examination of the evidence at hand is carried out, we can start to see a much darker picture. According to an internet blog post posted by Jack Hewitt's sister-in-law in 2017, she relayed some points of information which were not made public back in 1978. She believed that the Yuba City Five had witnessed some sort of altercation between a woman and a group of men outside the basketball game. The 5 lads had gone to help the woman, which then led to a hostile confrontation. She claimed that Gary Mathias was thrown from a bridge and died in the fall, causing the others to flee in the car and in a panic ended up driving up the mountain trail and getting lost. Another detail which was apparently left out of reports at the time were that shell casings were recovered at the entrance to the mountain road. So let's assume for a minute that this information is true and accurate. Then how do you explain that the boys stopped to buy snacks a short time after the game? This doesn't sound like a group scared out of their minds. Ultimately, this theory just leads to more questions. I can only hope that one day the poor families of all those involved get the closure that they so desperately need. That's it for this video, folks. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. If you've gotten this far in the video, be sure to tickle that like button, and hey, leave a wee comment. I'll always reply. Stay safe out there, and as always, keep smiling.